Executive Arab prisoned a camera on his blind daughter's guide dog, saw images from the daycare, and called 911. Khalid al-Rashid built an empire from nothing. A powerful Arab executive, feared and respected in the business world. But no amount of money or influence could prepare him for the terror he was about to witness. His daughter, Amira, was everything to him. After losing her sight in an accident, he gave her the best life possible, the best education, the most advanced technology, and Max, her loyal guide dog. But then, Amira started changing. She refused to talk about her daycare. She flinched at small noises. She woke up crying at night. Something was wrong. Desperate for answers, Khalid hid a tiny camera in Max's collar. He expected to see teachers and children, an ordinary day. But what he saw instead made his blood run cold. His fingers trembled. His heart raced. Without hesitation, he grabbed his phone and called 911. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. The truth behind this story will leave you shocked. The sound of his daughter's laughter used to be Khalid al-Rashid's favorite melody. But now there was silence, a silence that stretched between them, heavy, unnatural. He sat across from Amira at the breakfast table, watching her as she slowly pushed cereal around her bowl, not eating. Max, her guide dog, sat at her feet, his body tense. Khalid's fingers tapped against the marble counter, his mind racing. "Did you sleep well, Habibti?" His voice was careful, measured. Amira hesitated. Yes. A lie. He knew it. He had heard her the night before, muffled sobs breaking the quiet of the mansion. He had rushed to her room, but when he got there, she had pretended to be asleep. It wasn't the first time. Something was wrong. 3 weeks ago, she had been full of life, always talking about her daycare, about the kids, the games, the teachers. Then, suddenly, everything changed. She became quiet, withdrawn. She clung to Max's leash as if her life depended on it. When he asked her about her day, she would either give vague answers or change the subject completely. And then there were the nights, the way she whimpered in her sleep, the way she jolted awake, gasping for air. Max's behavior had changed too. The normally obedient and calm guide dog had become restless. Every morning, when Khalid placed the harness on him to take Amira to daycare, Max hesitated before stepping forward, as if he didn't want to go. Khalid had built his fortune by following his instincts, and right now they were screaming at him. Something was happening inside that daycare. He reached for his coffee, his grip tightening around the mug. "Amira, do you like it there?" A long pause. "Yes." Another lie. His jaw clenched. "You can tell me anything, Habibti. If there's something bothering you, you know I will fix it." Amira's hands trembled slightly as she reached for Max's fur. She shook her head. It's fine, Baba. Fine. The word settled uneasily in Khaled's chest. That night, after Amira went to bed, Khaled sat in his study, staring at his laptop. He could easily hire a security team to investigate the daycare, pull up records, question the staff. But he needed something concrete first. He needed proof. His gaze shifted to Max, who lay by the door, ears perked. That dog was always watching. An idea formed. Khaled picked up his phone and made a call. I need a micro camera, something discreet. By morning the device was in his hands. A tiny camera, barely the size of a button. His fingers worked quickly, securing it under Max's collar. Amira wouldn't notice. Neither would the daycare staff. As she got ready, Khaled knelt in front of Max, running his hand through the dog's thick fur. "Show me what you see," he murmured. Max licked his hand as if he understood. When they arrived at the daycare, Amira hesitated at the entrance. Khaled saw it, the small flinch before she stepped inside. She turned toward him, forcing a smile. "See you later, Baba." He kissed the top of her head. "I'll be back soon." Max turned his head slightly toward Khaled before leading Amira inside. The moment they disappeared behind the door, Khaled exhaled sharply. His gut twisted. This place held secrets. He was sure of it. Back at his office, he pulled up the live feed from the hidden camera. At first, everything seemed normal. The teachers greeted the children, guiding them to their activities. Amira sat with a group, smiling faintly. But then, something changed. A teacher approached Amira. A man. His voice was too low for the microphone to catch clearly, but his body language was wrong. Too close. Too familiar. Max sat at Amira's side, his ears flicking forward. His body stiffened. The man reached out. Khaled's hands curled into fists as he watched Amira shrink back, her smile disappearing. Then suddenly, the screen glitched. Static. The video cut out for a few seconds. When it returned, Amira was gone. Khaled's stomach dropped. He switched to another angle. The camera's view shifted as Max moved through the room. The teacher was leading Amira somewhere. His pulse pounded in his ears as he watched the man take her toward a door at the back of the room. A door that led... No. Khaled's breath hitched as he realized. That wasn't a classroom. It wasn't part of the daycare's main space. It was the storage room. His vision blurred with rage. He grabbed his phone with shaking hands and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? Khaled's voice came out sharp, deadly. There is a man taking my blind daughter into a locked room. I need police at the Happy Steps daycare. Right now. The operator's voice was calm, but Khaled's pulse thundered in his ears. Sir, can you confirm the address? Happy Steps Daycare, 5th Avenue. Move now. His voice was sharp, controlled, but inside a storm raged. He switched his eyes back to the screen. Amira was gone. The last thing he had seen was the teacher leading her toward the storage room, Max following closely behind. But now, nothing. The feed was still active, but Max wasn't in the playroom anymore. Khaled stood abruptly, grabbing his keys. He wasn't going to sit here and watch. He was going there. "Sir, officers are on the way, but I need you to stay calm. Do you have visual confirmation that your daughter is in danger?" Khaled's fingers tightened around his phone. "I put a hidden camera on my daughter's guide dog. I saw a man take her into a private room. The camera is still streaming, but I have no visual." Then the screen shifted. A jolt of movement. A sudden blur. Then a whimper. Max. The image was tilted sideways, shaking as if the dog had been pushed over. Khaled's blood ran ice cold. The door to the storage room came into focus, just slightly ajar. A shadow moved inside. The camera angle adjusted as Max lifted his head. The video was dark, but something felt wrong. A muffled voice. A low, deep tone. Not loud, not yelling, but something about it was off. Then, Amira's voice. Soft, trembling. "I don't want to." Khaled's stomach twisted into a knot. Max moved. The screen jostled as the dog got up, stepping toward the door. Khaled's fists clenched as he watched. Then, suddenly, a hand appeared. It reached for Max, and then the feed cut out. Static. Nothing. Khaled's vision blurred with rage. He didn't remember leaving his office, didn't remember getting into his car. All he knew was that he was driving like a madman through the streets of Manhattan, running red lights, cutting through lanes, his mind racing faster than the car itself. The dispatcher's voice echoed in his ear. "Officers are en route. ETA 3 minutes. Sir, I need you to remain." "I will not remain anywhere," Khaled snapped. "I will be there before your officers." He pressed the gas harder. His mind spun with possibilities. Who was that man? Was he a real teacher? Or was there something else happening inside that daycare? Something darker? And where was Amira now? 100 horrific scenarios crashed into his mind, each one worse than the last. His little girl, blind, helpless, trapped in a room with someone he didn't know. Rage boiled in his chest. No, she wasn't helpless. She had Max. And Max would fight to the death for her. Khaled swerved onto Fifth Avenue, his tires screeching as he pulled up in front of the daycare. Police cars were already arriving, sirens blaring, lights flashing. He didn't wait, didn't think. He stormed inside. The receptionist jolted to her feet as the door slammed open. "Sir, you can't—" Khaled ignored her. 2 officers were already moving toward the hallway. One turned, raising a hand. "Sir, we need you to step back." "My daughter is in there," Khaled growled. The officer hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Khaled to push past him. He didn't need them. He would handle this himself. Down the hall, past the classrooms, the children, the teachers, their faces a blur. His breath was sharp, his steps rapid. Then, the storage room. The door was slightly ajar. A low growl came from inside. Max. Khaled's heart slammed against his ribs. He shoved the door open, and what he saw inside froze him in place. Max stood between Amira and the man, teeth bared, growling so deep it vibrated through the floor. His fur was bristled, his stance low, ready to attack. Amira stood behind him, pressed against the shelves, her small hands clutching his fur. The man, a teacher Khaled had never seen before, stood in front of them, his face pale, his hands raised. She got scared, the man stammered. I was just trying to... Khaled lunged. Khaled didn't think. He moved. The moment his body lunged forward, the so-called teacher stumbled back, his eyes wide with panic. He raised his hands as if to defend himself, but it didn't matter. Khaled grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the nearest shelf. A crash echoed through the small storage room as boxes tumbled to the floor. You were just trying to... What? Khaled's voice was low, deadly. His grip tightened, his knuckles white with rage. Explain! The man gasped, his hands clawing at Khaled's wrists. It's a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Khaled's vision blurred with red. Behind him, Amira flinched at the sound of the struggle, pressing herself closer to Max, her small fingers gripping his fur like a lifeline. The dog stood rigid, still growling, ready to kill if given the command. Khaled was seconds away from ripping this man apart when police officers stormed the room. Sir, step back, one officer barked, his hand hovering near his holster. Khaled barely heard him. His heart pounded, his chest rising and falling in sharp, shallow breaths. Let him go. The second officer moved closer. Now. It took everything in him, but Khaled slowly released his grip, letting the man drop to the floor, gasping for air. Cuff him, one officer ordered. The other moved forward, yanking the teacher's hands behind his back, snapping cold steel around his wrists. You're under investigation, the officer muttered. Khaled stepped back, breathing hard. His hands were still clenched into fists, rage still boiling beneath his skin, but his focus snapped to Amira. She was trembling, her lips pressed together. Her small hands gripped Max's harness too tightly. He knelt beside her, voice softer now. Habibti. At the sound of his voice, Amira turned toward him, her blank eyes wet with unshed tears. Baba, I'm here, he murmured, brushing a stray curl from her face. For a moment, she was silent. Then, she collapsed into his arms, her small body shaking as she sobbed against his chest. Khaled closed his eyes, wrapping her in his arms, breathing her in, his baby girl, his world, safe. But his mind was still burning. Something had happened here. Something bad. Khaled looked up at the officers. "You need to check the footage." His voice was ice. "From my daughter's guide dog." The lead officer nodded. "We'll need access." Khaled didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone, tapping into the security cloud where the footage was stored. He handed it over, his jaw clenched tight. "I want to know everything that happened in this room." One officer led the arrested teacher out of the storage room while another began reviewing the footage. Khaled sat on the floor, holding a mirror against him as she calmed, her breathing slowing. Max, still tense, never took his eyes off the door. Minutes passed before the officer with the phone froze. "Oh my God," he whispered. Khaled's stomach dropped. He shifted, his muscles taut. "What?" The officer turned the phone toward him. The screen replayed the last captured moments from Max's camera. Khaled's eyes locked onto the image. Amira sat on the floor, her small fingers running over a stuffed toy. The teacher, the man Khaled had just attacked, stood behind her. His hand reached out, but not in a way that a teacher should, not in a way that made sense. Then, Max moved. The camera shook as the dog lunged, knocking the man backward before he could do anything else. The screen glitched. Then, static. Khaled felt physically ill. His grip tightened around Amira, rage searing through him like wildfire. The officer exhaled sharply. "We need to take him in for questioning." Khaled's jaw flexed. "That's not enough." "Sir, we have to follow protocol." Khaled's stomach churned. Protocol. What if there were others? What if this wasn't the first time? His daughter was lucky. She had Max. But what about the other children? His hands shook with fury. "I want this place shut down." "We'll do everything we can, sir." The officer nodded. "But I promise you, he won't walk away from this." Khaled's gaze dropped to Amira. She had stopped shaking, exhaustion pulling her into a fragile calm. Max sat beside them, his body pressed close, his warmth a silent promise. A promise that no one would ever hurt her again. Khaled took a deep breath, his arms tightening around Amira. This wasn't over. Not until he was sure. Khaled sat in the back of his car, holding Amira close as his driver sped through the city. His mind was a battlefield, torn between relief and rage. Amira was safe. The man had been arrested. But the questions wouldn't stop. What if Max hadn't been there? What if Amira had been alone? How long had this been happening? And worst of all, how many other children had suffered in silence? He looked down at his daughter. She had finally drifted off, exhaustion pulling her into sleep against his chest. Her little hands still gripped Max's fur, even in unconsciousness. Max sat beside her, unmoving, his amber eyes alert. A guardian, a warrior. Khaled exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. He had spent his entire life controlling everything, in business, in power, in the way people feared and respected his name. But today, he had almost lost the one thing that mattered most. His phone buzzed. He answered without hesitation. "Talk." His security chief's voice was sharp. "Sir, I've been reviewing the footage from the Daycare's internal cameras." Khalid's grip on the phone tightened. "And?" There was a pause. Then, the words that made his blood run cold. This wasn't the first time. Khalid felt the air leave his lungs, his jaw clenched, his fingers digging into the leather seat. How long? From what we can tell, at least a month, maybe longer. There are gaps in the footage, deleted sections. Someone tried to cover their tracks. Khaled's stomach twisted violently. He clenched his fist so hard his nails dug into his palm. A month. He had been sending Amira there, thinking she was safe, thinking she was cared for, and all this time, she had been terrified. His vision blurred with rage. Find out how deep this goes. Every staff member, every record, every child who attended. I want everything, and I want it tonight. Yes, sir. Khalid ended the call, his mind spiraling. The police would do their job, but it wasn't enough. He had built an empire on knowing what others didn't, controlling what others couldn't. And right now, he was going to control this. He turned to his driver. "Take us home. Then get me a list of every investor in that daycare." The man nodded. "Understood, sir." Khalid's gaze dropped back to Amira. She looked so small. His baby girl. A burning determination settled in his chest. He had spent his life acquiring wealth, power, respect. Now, he would use every ounce of it to bury the people who did this, and he wouldn't stop until every single one of them paid. Khalid didn't sleep that night. He sat in his private study, staring at the screen in front of him, his face carved from stone. The security team had done exactly what he ordered. Every record, every deleted file, every missing frame from the daycare surveillance system had been recovered. And what he saw made his stomach churn with pure rage. There were more children, more victims. The man who had taken Amira into the storage room. He wasn't alone. He was part of something bigger, something calculated. Khaled scrolled through the files, each one a silent horror, a hidden crime committed behind closed doors. The footage revealed small moments, things that on the surface might seem innocent, but, under scrutiny, were anything but. A hand resting on a child's shoulder for too long. A whispered word that made a little girl stiffen. A boy flinching when a teacher walked past. It wasn't just one man. It was an operation. His hand curled into a fist so tight that his knuckles turned white. His entire body burned with the realization that this had been happening under everyone's noses. His phone rang, slicing through the tense silence. It was his security chief. "Sir, I have the list of investors you requested." Khalid inhaled sharply. "Send it to me." Within seconds, the document popped up on his screen. He scanned the names. High-profile businessmen, silent partners, wealthy individuals who had invested in the Daycare chain. Some he recognized. Others were strangers. But one name stood out, one that made his breath pause. Jamal Al-Fayez, a man he had crossed paths with in business years ago. A man whose reputation was always just clean enough to avoid scrutiny, but whose presence always left behind whispers of corruption. Khalid's rage sharpened. So this was the kind of filth that man was involved in. He pressed a button on his desk, his voice deadly calm. Summon the board members of Happy Steps Daycare. Immediately. His assistant hesitated. Sir, it's past midnight. I don't care if they are in their graves, Khalid snapped. I want them at my office in 1 hour. No excuses. The silence that followed was enough to tell him his command would be obeyed. He ended the call, his fingers tapping against the desk. This wasn't just about Amira anymore. This was about justice. He turned to the security footage again, his eyes locking onto Max, his daughter's loyal guide dog. The moment in the storage room replayed in his mind. The way Max had put himself between Amira and the teacher. The way he had lunged without hesitation. The way he had fought for her. Max had seen everything. He had known. If not for him. Khalid exhaled, his throat tightening. He had spent his life believing that only men could be warriors. Only men could be protectors. But tonight, he had witnessed true loyalty, true courage. Max had done what Khalid himself had failed to do, protected Amira when no one else could. A lump formed in his throat. He clenched his jaw and looked away from the screen. Then quietly, he made a decision. He pressed another button on his desk, calling his personal lawyer. The groggy voice on the other end mumbled, "Sir, I want my legal team to draw up ownership papers for Max," Khalid interrupted. "Effective immediately. He is no longer a service animal. He is a member of the Al-Rashid family." A pause. "Sir, legally that means—" "I don't care," Khalid said, his voice softer now. "Make it happen." Because as much as he was about to destroy the men behind this operation, he also knew one thing. Amira had already found her guardian, and he wasn't going anywhere. The boardroom was silent. The men seated around the massive table shifted uncomfortably under Khalid's burning stare. The air was thick with tension. They had been summoned in the middle of the night, unaware that tonight would change everything. Khalid placed a tablet on the table and pressed play. The hidden footage filled the screen. The evidence was undeniable. The men paled. One of them stood abruptly. This isn't what it looks like." Khalid's voice was like steel. "It is exactly what it looks like." Jamal Al-Fayez's face remained calm, but his fingers drummed the table. "You think you can make this disappear?" Khalid's voice was dangerously low. "You think money will save you?" Jamal smirked. "Everything has a price." Khalid leaned forward. Not this time. The door burst open. Police officers swarmed in. Jamal's smirk vanished. Khaled's final words before they were taken away. Rot in hell. The sun was rising. The nightmare was over. Khaled sat on the garden terrace watching Amira play. She was smiling again, carefree, happy. Max lay beside her, ears twitching as he watched her every move. A protector, a warrior, a brother. Khaled knelt beside the dog, running a hand through his fur. "You saved her," he murmured. Max nudged his palm. Khaled exhaled. "You're not just a dog." Max blinked. "You're family." Amira turned toward them, her face lit with joy. "Come on, Baba. Play with us." Khaled smiled, a real, unguarded smile. For the first time in weeks, he felt peace. And he knew one thing: no one would ever hurt her again.